Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths and legends are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now settle in, relax, and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. Imagine the most handsome mortal ever born, so breathtaking, even the gods lost control. Two powerful goddesses fell for him, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Persephone, queen of the dead. One wanted to keep him in the light, the other in the shadows. What followed was a love triangle so intense it changed the course of nature and ended in blood. This is the story of Adonis and Aphrodite and the uninvited third party, Persephone. Before the gods envied him, before two goddesses warred for his presence, and before the world bled red for his sake, there was only a tree split open not by lightning, but by grief. The tree had once been a girl. Her name was Mira, and she had been cursed. Some said it was Aphrodite's doing, a punishment for a forgotten slight. Others whispered it was fate itself, dragging her into the sins of her bloodline. One way or another, Mira was driven to lie with her own father, and when the gods took pity, too late as they often did, they changed her into a tree so she would not have to live with what had happened. But it was not mercy, not really. The myrrh tree stood alone in the wilderness, its bark weeping fragrant sap as though it remembered her tears. And from within, pain stirred again, not as memory, but as life. The bark split. It did not crack loudly. It sighed like something giving up. The opening revealed flesh, slick with birth and ancient sorrow. From the hollow trunk slid a newborn boy, bathed in blood and myrrh, not crying, only breathing. The wind paused. Birds stopped mid-chatter. Even insects fell quiet. The gods noticed. There was something about him, the curve of his limbs, the glow of his skin, the unbearable symmetry of his face. He did not yet have a name, but already the world was bracing itself. Beauty that pure was never left alone for long. It was Aphrodite who came first. She did not descend in thunder or blinding light. She simply appeared, ankle deep in golden grass, her eyes so heavy with disbelief. She had seen all kinds of loveliness before, the shimmer of a pearl in seawater, the flush of a first kiss, the curve of a lover's spine in morning light. But this was different. He was small and mortal and silent, yet there was power in him, not the kind that breaks cities, the kind that draws everything closer without asking permission. Aphrodite bent down and gathered him in her arms. He did not flinch. She did not speak. Her touch was not motherly, nor lustful. It was something else, something unnamed. She knew she could not keep him, not yet. There were too many eyes in the upper world. Hera, who watched Aphrodite with suspicion. Artemis, who disdained her pleasures. Ares, her on-again, off-again fury of a lover, whose jealousy was quick and blood-soaked. Aphrodite had secrets, but this boy would not survive as one of them. So she thought of the only place untouched by mortal greed and divine vanity. The underworld. It was quiet there, cold, yes, but safe. Time moved differently, and life was not expected. It was ruled by one who knew loss intimately, who held shadows the way Aphrodite held longing. Persephone. Aphrodite carried the infant to the mouth of a cave that led to the depths. No mortal would have made it far. No other goddess would have dared descend uninvited. But she was Aphrodite, desire made flesh, and even the walls of Hades softened in her presence. She stepped into the dark. The underworld was not cruel, not at first glance. It was silent in a way the world above never could be. Still, breathless. The rivers whispered to themselves. Shadows leaned without weight. Souls lingered like the scent of old smoke. Persephone met her at the gates. She wore no crown, no veil, only a robe of deep plum, her hair loose as winter branches. Her face was unreadable, but her gaze flicked to the child in Aphrodite's arms, and something old stirred in her silence. "You brought me a gift?" she asked, though her voice held no humor. "No," Aphrodite said gently, "a charge." Persephone looked closer. The boy's skin was pale, yet warm. He blinked, not like a child, but like someone seeing light after centuries of sleep. "What's his name?" the queen asked. "I haven't given him one yet," Aphrodite replied. "He was born from sorrow. Let the world name him after it has felt him." Persephone said nothing, but she extended her hands, and Aphrodite placed the boy in them without a word. It was not a surrender, it was a postponement. Persephone turned without fanfare and walked into the deeper dark, the child resting against her chest. Aphrodite watched them go, her heart caught in something sharp and unfamiliar. Not lust, not love, not even envy. Something like fear. When she returned to the upper world, spring burst into bloom around her feet. Flowers she didn't name opened wide toward the sun. Birds sang louder than they had before. She walked among them, smiling, but her mind remained beneath the earth. In the underworlds, the boy did not cry. He grew, slowly at first. The dead had no children, no games, no firelight laughter, but the shadows made room for him. Persephone watched. She too was a girl, taken from one world and placed in another. She understood quiet yearning. She recognized what it meant to belong nowhere completely. And so, she sat beside him. She hummed old songs. She offered him pomegranate seeds, not as temptation, but as sustenance. He learned to speak, to walk, to listen to the murmurs of ghosts, and she learned to wait. At first, her affection was careful, distant, protective. She was queen, not mother, but he looked at her with eyes that held no fear, no judgment. In him, she saw no reminders of Hades, no echoes of Demeter, just warmth. She did not give him a name either. That, she decided, would come when he chose one. But when she caught his reflection in the obsidian mirrors of the palace halls, and when she saw what he was becoming, what the gods above would see when they looked upon him again, she felt the first pang of something darker than care, possession. Because in time, the goddess of love would come back for what she left behind, and Persephone, queen of the dead, was not sure she would let him go. He grew like a secret. Slowly at first, in the heavy stillness of the underworld. There was no sun to stretch toward, no winds to tousle his hair, no rain to wash the stone from his skin. Yet he grew. He bloomed beneath obsidian skies and beside rivers that remembered the dead. There was no laughter in that place, No festivals or feasts, but still he smiled, and the shadows gathered like petals around him. Persephone watched from a distance that closed each day. She had not asked for him, she had not needed him, but the underworld had long ago swallowed her hunger for need, and in its place left only silence. Then came the boy, bright-eyed, beautiful, strange. He brought no questions, no demands, just a presence, a weightless warmth, like a candle left burning in an abandoned temple. She gave him no rules, no titles, no name. He drifted through the palace halls, brushing his fingers against cold marble, staring into bottomless pools as if listening for something they had yet to say. The dead whispered as he passed, drawn to his blood like moths to something not quite fire. He did not belong, that was clear, but he did not resist the place either. There was a kind of grace in how he moved through it, a dreamer born into a tomb, a spark that had not learned fear. Persephone felt it long before she named it, the ache of attachment, quiet and unwanted. He was not hers, not really, but she had fed him from her table and watched his limbs lengthen and memorized the curve of his mouth when he slept. In this place of forgotten names, she had held him too long to forget his shape. And then the air changed. It began with the scent. The living world had many perfumes, ripe fruit, grass after storm, crushed petals under bare feet. They did not belong in the underworld, yet the wind shifted one day, and the smell of honey and sea salt drifted through the palace gates. She knew before she turned who had returned. Aphrodite, the goddess of desire, did not knock. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the corridors like floodwater, soft and dangerous. Her skin glowed like sunrise, her hair curled like wine pouring from an untouched jar. Her eyes searched, already knowing what they would find. She saw him before she spoke, and when she did not speak, the silence said more. He stood at the edge of the garden, a garden of stones and ghost lilies, white as old bones. He looked at her the way he looked at the stars he'd only ever heard about, as if she were a myth that had come down to earth. His face held no memory of her, but something deeper stirred beneath his gaze. Recognition without reason. Persephone stood behind him, her hands folded, her mouth unreadable. Aphrodite moved closer. He did not run, he did not bow. He simply watched her with that unnerving stillness he'd learned from the dead. Her hand brushed his shoulder, a touch light as breath. In that instant, the underworld felt colder. No words were spoken, but something between them sparked, too sudden, too bright. It was not the rawness of maternal affection. It was not the chill of curiosity. It was something ancient and dangerous, something Aphrodite knew better than any being alive. Desire. Persephone felt it rise like a chill beneath her ribs, a shift in the balance she had carefully nurtured. He had never looked at her like that. He had never tilted his head with such quiet awe. He had never reached toward her as if he might fall without contact. She stepped forward, not to stop them, but to stand between the spaces left unsaid. Aphrodite turned to her. The look that passed between them was not cold, nor kind. It was the gaze of two goddesses who understood what it meant to lose the same thing at the same time. There would be no fight, no storm of lightning or cracked skies. There would be rules. The matter was taken to Olympus, to Zeus, whose indifference was a kind of power in itself. He did not care about love, not really, but he cared about order. And Aphrodite, unwilling to risk war, stood in silence while Persephone's calm masked something unyielding. Zeus made the decree. Adonis would split his time, a third with Persephone in the underworld, a third with Aphrodite in the realm above, and a third wherever he wished to go. That last third would be his alone. The boy said nothing. No one asked him to. But when the choice came, when the cycle was drawn out and offered, he made it. He chose Aphrodite. The choice hung in the air like incense burned too long, sweet at first, then heavy, then suffocating. Persephone did not speak. She only nodded once and turned her gaze away, not out of mercy, out of memory. The boy left the underworld for the first time with Aphrodite's hand in his, and though he did not look back, the shadows followed him, curling low at his heels like smoke that had forgotten how to rise. The world above met him like an old dream. He squinted at the light, the sky, wide and endless, the warmth on his skin, the flowers beneath his feet. He inhaled, and it felt like drowning in sweetness. The birds did not fear him. The trees bent just slightly in his direction. Spring bloomed around him, not because of him, but because of who held his hand. Aphrodite watched him with something close to awe, not because he belonged to her, but because he chose to. He did not speak of the underworld, and she did not ask. But at night, when he dreamed, his sleep was never fully quiet. And far below, Persephone watched the seasons shift. She felt the bloom above and the empty space beside her throne. The cold had grown a little colder, and her patience, once so vast, had begun to thin. Adonis bloomed in Aphrodite's world the way spring is born from winter's last breath. The air was sweet with his presence, a fragrance of wildflowers and salt water that never quite faded. The gods looked at him and sighed, for his beauty had not lost its edge. It was a sharpness, a pull, a gravity that drew the eye, but it did not settle. He was not of this world, not truly. Yet in Aphrodite's presence, he was at home. She watched him with the kind of devotion that could break cities and mend them all in the same breath. She had seen the flowers open at her feet, had felt the rise of desire surge through mortal hearts. But this was something else. This was something that made even her afraid. She had him. He was hers, but not in the way she had ever known possession. There was a fragility to him that touched her, like glass at the edge of breaking, and she tried not to hold him too tightly. She had been a goddess for so long, but with him she had become something else. A watcher, a lover, a keeper of something wild and transient. They walked the earth together, always in step but never quite aligned. The world unfurled beneath their feet, like the rolling of a carpet that knew no end. Flowers bent toward him, pale petals opening to drink in the light. Trees seemed to stretch their branches higher when he passed, as if the earth itself bowed in reverence to the boy born from sorrow. In the evenings, the sky softened into twilight, and Aphrodite would bring him to the sea. She had tried to teach him the rhythm of the tides, the secret language of the ocean, but he could only listen in silence. His eyes would trace the horizon, deep and endless, as though searching for something only he could see. He didn't ask. He never asked. He was content to follow her, content to be her shadow on these long golden nights. But sometimes, just sometimes, the hunger inside him stirred, and it was not for her touch. It was something else, a restlessness in his chest that would not settle. Aphrodite sensed it. She had loved before, many times in many ways, but this boy was different. He did not belong to her completely. He was a dream, a thing that existed for a time, but could not be held too tightly. She had wrapped him in her love. She had showered him with the pleasures of the earth, flowers, perfumes, feasts. She had taught him the music of the winds, the taste of honey on the tongue, the sweetness of the sun against skin. But all of it was not enough. There was something in him that longed for more. Her love, her devotion was endless, yet she could not fill him. And that thought, that quiet knowledge, began to gnaw at her from the inside out. But there was still beauty, still joy to be had in his company. Aphrodite would find herself laughing when he mimicked her movements. He was curious in a way that was innocent, but also almost impossible to satisfy. He would touch the petals of flowers, marveling at their softness, and wonder aloud about things he had never known, about the world, about mortality, about the fleeting nature of time. She had never wanted to explain time to anyone before. He would ask, in those rare moments when they stopped to rest, "How long will I stay?" And she would smile, a smile so soft it broke her heart before she could answer. "As long as you wish," she would say. But the words felt empty as soon as they left her lips. She had no answer to that question, not really. At times she felt his gaze, distant and turned inward, as if the boy she loved had already wandered into another world. It was not that he was unkind or ungrateful or dissatisfied, but something deep within him yearned for something more. He craved freedom. The days were endless, flowing one into another with the grace of silk unspooling across the sky. He would disappear into the forest sometimes, chasing after things she couldn't see, things she'd never felt the need to understand. She would let him go. She always let him go, because he came back. But in those moments when he was gone, there was a hollow in the world around her. The earth did not sing quite the same. The flowers did not bloom with the same urgency. Aphrodite, for the first time, began to understand the true cost of desire. Love, she had always known, was a force that could move mountains, but it also burned away the things that were not quite yours to claim. But still, she loved him. He returned to her each time, his presence like the softest of winds that would not be held back. And when he looked at her with those quiet eyes, when he placed his hand in hers, all the doubts, all the fear would melt away. He would rest beside her under the stars, and they would sleep as though the world had no edges, no end. One evening, when the sky burned red with the dying sun, Aphrodite watched him closely. He stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the horizon, his hair lifting slightly in the evening breeze. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She could feel the change in him, the restlessness that had grown from a whisper to a shout. "Adonis," she whispered, but he didn't answer. His gaze was far away, caught in some vision she couldn't see. The wind tugged at him, as if calling him back to the earth. She stood there for a moment, silent, watching him. And below, far below in the underworld, Persephone felt the stirrings of something deep within her, a feeling that was not quite jealousy, but something far older. The earth remembered him, the dead remembered him, and perhaps, in some way, so did she. The quiet tug-of-war began then, the one she had tried to ignore, the one she thought was buried with the bones of time. Aphrodite's love was endless, yes, but Adonis was a boy, and boys, no matter how beautiful, no matter how loved, were restless things. And for the first time, Persephone felt her own hunger stir. Adonis, the boy born from blood and sorrow, had grown into something beyond the measure of mortals. His beauty was still unearthly, but it was no longer just a passive gift of the gods. It had become a hunger, a need, something that pulsed beneath his skin, urging him to chase the world in ways Aphrodite could not control. He had learned to hunt, though Aphrodite never wanted him to. She had feared it from the start, the bloodshed, the danger. She had known the wildness in him from the moment she first held him, but now it seemed to grow with every passing day. He sought the hunt not just for food, but for something deeper, something untamed that called to him from the heart of the earth itself. The days grew longer, the air thick with the promise of summer. Flowers bloomed and faded, but in the forest there was something more. The ground was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the crackling of branches underfoot, and the rhythmic beat of Adonis's footsteps as he ventured farther each time, ever seeking the horizon. Aphrodite's love was still fierce, still bright, but it began to feel like a cage around him, soft and fragrant though it was. She felt the change in him, the restlessness that had no name, the desire for something beyond her reach. And though she tried to calm it, to wrap him in her warmth, she could not give him what he truly sought. He was drawn to the wild places, to the untamed parts of the earth that were both beautiful and dangerous. He could not resist. The scent of the forest, the weight of the earth beneath his feet, the pull of something primal, something that existed outside of love. It was more than he could bear. And so, on the morning that the forest grew thick with mist, he slipped away. Aphrodite's gaze followed him, but she said nothing. She had learned not to stop him. He needed this. But even as she stood at the threshold of the meadow, where the flowers danced in the soft breeze, she felt an ache she could not name. He moved through the forest, breathing in the cool air that smelled of pine and wet earth. His footsteps were silent, the sound of his breath the only thing that broke the quiet of the wild. His heart raced in a way that was not just from exertion, but from something deeper, a hunger, a need. Adonis had always been something of a paradox. Beautiful, yes, but he was also untouched by the rules of gods and men. He had been born for desire and destruction, caught between the promise of love and the wild call of freedom. His beauty had been a gift, but it had also bound him in a way he could never quite escape. He wanted to know the world for himself. He wanted to chase the edges of what was forbidden. And in that moment, the world of shadows and sunlight seemed to open up before him. The trees parted slightly, and in the distance, he saw it. The massive shape of a boar, its tusks gleaming white like knives in the half-light of dawn. Adonis felt the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of the hunt, the pull of danger. He was not afraid. He had been warned, of course. Aphrodite had told him to stay close, to be careful, but there was no room for caution in the heart of the wild, not for him. The boar snorted, its thick nostrils flaring. It turned, sensing him, and for a moment, everything was still. Time seemed to stretch out as though the world held its breath. Then, with a roar, the boar charged. The earth shook with the force of it. Adonis leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the sharp tusks that could split him in two. He felt the air cut through him, the thrill of danger coursing through his veins like fire. He was not just hunting, he was becoming the hunt. His body was a blur of motion, and the world spun with the rush of blood, the sound of hooves and tusks, and his own heartbeat that echoed in his chest like a drum. Aphrodite stood at the edge of the meadow, her hands pressed against her chest, watching him from afar. She could not see the boar, she could not see the danger he was in, but she felt it all the same. Her heart quickened. It was not the same feeling she had when she watched him play in the fields or rest beneath the stars. This was something else, something primal and raw. She moved toward the forest, her footsteps light but swift, and even in the stillness, she could not shake the growing sense of dread that clung to her like fog. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when Adonis would slip from her grasp, when he would push beyond the safety of her love and into the world where the gods had no reach. And then she heard it, the sound of a scream that was almost lost in the wind, but still enough to chill her blood. The boar was upon him again. It charged with reckless fury, tusks aimed straight for his chest. Adonis ducked, rolling across the damp earth, his heart hammering in his chest. The boar was relentless, its eyes wild and filled with an ancient hatred, as though it had been sent for him, or perhaps for someone else. With one swift motion, Adonis drew the hunting spear he had carried and thrust it forward, piercing the beast's side. The boar shrieked, a terrible guttural sound that split the air, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. The creature staggered, its breath ragged, its tusks scraping the ground. But it was not enough. The beast still had strength, and with one last desperate lunge, it twisted, its tusks catching Adonis across the chest, dragging him down. Aphrodite reached the clearing just in time to see Adonis fall to the ground, the blood already staining the earth beneath him. She ran, her heart wild with fear, but when she reached him, it was too late. The boar was dead, but so was he. His body was still warm, but his breath had already begun to fade. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside him, her fingers brushing against his skin. His eyes were open, unseeing, and the sight of them struck her like a dagger to the heart. She had seen love die before, but this was different. This was her love, her heart, her everything, and it had been torn away so quickly. The world shifted, but there was no turning back now. The world seemed to hold its breath, as though the earth itself was mourning the boy who had once been its brightest light. Adonis is born from sorrow, loved by gods, and now taken by fate, lay still, his beauty no longer a promise, but a memory. Aphrodite's hands trembled as she cradled his body, the blood still warm against her palms. She had never known grief like this. She had seen death before, had watched mortal lovers fade, had seen kings fall from their thrones and warriors die in battle. But this was different. This was a loss she could not grasp. He was hers, but he was not hers, and now he was gone, swallowed by the earth in a final, brutal act that no love could reverse. She wept, and her tears fell like the softest rain, soaking into the ground. The flowers wept too, bending their fragile heads in sympathy, petals falling into the silence that filled the forest. Time itself seemed to pause, caught in the thrall of grief. Her heart beat erratically, faster with every breath she took, as if the life that still lingered in her veins was unwilling to let go of the last piece of him. His scent, sweet as honey and salt, clung to the air, and she could still feel the weight of his presence beside her. It had not yet fully vanished, but soon it would. Soon, the world would go back to its rhythm, and Adonis would be but a story whispered on the wind. Beneath the earth, Persephone stirred. She had felt it, the sharp snap of something dying. But she had not known it was him. She had not known it would happen so soon and so violently. The underworld was not unfamiliar with loss. But this loss was hers in a way that none of the others had been. She had raised him. She had watched him grow beneath her gaze, had seen him blossom like a flower that had no roots, no home. She had cared for him in a way that was not maternal, but something else, something dangerous. She had been patient, had known that his beauty would lead him away from her, just as it had with Aphrodite. But she had not prepared herself for his death. No one had prepared her for this finality. The cold silence of her kingdom pressed in on her. She had come to know its depths, to find comfort in the dark places, but now she felt empty, as though a part of her had been taken away. She stood in the shadow of her throne, her fingers curling into the smooth stone of the palace walls, her face a mask of quiet fury and sorrow. She had not wanted him. She had not needed him, but she had wanted him. And now, in the cold, the void stretched before her, infinite and consuming. Aphrodite stayed by his side until the last of the light had drained from the sky. The stars, as if in silent tribute, shimmered faintly above, but they could not replace the loss in her chest. She could not return to the world of mortals with this emptiness inside her. She had loved him, had known love in its purest, rawest form, but this was its counterpart, the hollow that was left when it was torn away. She bent her head low, pressing her lips against his cold skin, whispering words of grief that the wind carried away. She could feel the change already beginning to sweep through the world, the seasons turning, the earth pulling back from its mourning. Spring would pass into summer, autumn would come, and in the cruelest of cycles, life would continue, but not for him, not for Adonis. As the morning sun began to rise, Aphrodite rose with it, though her heart had yet to leave the shadow of the night. She could not stay. She could not linger in the world of the living, haunted by what had been taken. Adonis was gone, and there was nothing left for her but the endless ache that would follow her for eternity. But the gods had spoken. The fates had already woven their threads. Zeus, watching from his throne on Olympus, had made his decision, and though Aphrodite had begged and pleaded, there was nothing that could change it. Adonis would return, but not for long. He would be reborn each year, part of the eternal cycle. Each spring, he would rise again, drawn from the very blood that had spilled beneath Aphrodite's hands. But when the flowers bloomed, so too would death find him once more. A child of both light and shadow, he was bound to the earth, to the cycles of birth and decay. In the world above, Aphrodite's love for him would never cease, but there would be no joy in their reunion, only the quiet echo of their time together, always fading, always fleeting. In the underworld, Persephone had no say in this. Her loss was deep, but it was not a loss of her own choosing. The gods had given her a moment to hold him, and then they had taken him away. She stood at the gates of her dark kingdom, watching as Adonis's body was taken, but she did not mourn. Not in the same way Aphrodite did. She could not. The dead, after all, did not mourn. And yet, even as she watched the earth swallow the boy who had briefly been hers, she understood that the love they had shared was not so easily forgotten. Her fingers trembled on the edge of the throne, and she wondered as the earth whispered beneath her feet if she would ever find peace. Aphrodite too could not forget. She had been the goddess of love, but she had never known this kind of pain. The loss of a love so deep it could tear apart gods and mortals alike. She had tried to keep him. She had tried to hold him close, but the earth had other plans. And so, with one final glance at the world they had shared, Aphrodite turned away, carrying the memory of Adonis with her like a secret, one that would never be forgotten, not by the world nor by herself. The myth of Adonis would be passed down through time, a story of love and loss, of fleeting beauty, and of the never-ending cycle that even gods could not escape. With Adonis lost, the earth continued to turn. The flowers bloomed each spring, and Aphrodite wept silently, but life went on as it always would.